They say every life is priceless. Delilah Kane learned hers cost exactly $127,000, and the man who paid it controlled Seattle's deadliest empire. Rain didn't cleanse Seattle. It just smeared the neon deeper into the oil-slicked puddles, made the grime shimmer like something precious. Inside the Sapphire Room, the rain was a silent film against bulletproof glass, irrelevant to the people who could afford to ignore weather altogether. This was where a bottle of wine cost more than Delilah's entire nursing tuition had been back when she'd still believed education could save her from poverty. That was 10 months ago, before her mother's third kidney failure, before the transplant list became a death sentence wrapped in bureaucratic paperwork, before Delilah had traded scrubs for a crisp black vest and the future for survival. The floor manager's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade through silk. Barrett Hughes stood near the kitchen doors, his cheap cologne fighting a losing battle against the garlic and truffle oil. He was 48, balding, and perpetually sweating despite the restaurant's perfect climate control. His eyes tracked Delilah with the predatory patience of a man who believed his authority made him desirable. "Table 9 needs sparkling water. Don't make eye contact, Kane. You know the protocol." Delilah's fingers tightened around the crystal pitcher ice water beading on the glass surface. Barrett had been escalating for 3 months now. Casual touches that lasted too long. Comments about her figure disguised as uniform compliance checks. Last week he'd cornered her in the walk-in freezer, his hand on the small of her back, his breath hot against her ear as he explained how the better shifts went to girls who understood teamwork. She'd smiled, stepped back, declined with the kind of polite firmness that left no room for misinterpretation. He'd given her every graveyard shift since. "Yes, Mr. Hughes." The dining room smelled of old money and older secrets. Delilah moved through it like smoke invisible by design. The marble floors reflected distorted versions of the crystal chandeliers overhead, fractured light dancing across surfaces that cost more than her mother's monthly dialysis treatments. At table 9, Power sat with perfect posture. 4 bodyguards stood at calculated distances close enough to intercept threats far enough to maintain the illusion of privacy. They wore suits that concealed weapons, their eyes never quite still, always scanning, always assessing. In the center of the circular booth sat a woman who made expensive look effortless. Isabella Castellano was 67 years old and looked like she could shatter bone with a glance. Silver hair pulled back so severely it seemed to lift her cheekbones higher. Black velvet dress that probably cost more than Delilah earned in 6 months. A pearl necklace heavy enough to be a weapon in the right hands. Across from her sat a man who radiated danger the way other people radiated warmth. Dante Castellano was 34 and looked like violence in an Armani suit. Dark hair cut with military precision. Eyes the color of slate before a storm. He listened to his mother with an intensity that made the air around him feel compressed, weighted with unspoken threats. Even sitting, he seemed coiled, ready to strike at the first sign of disrespect. Delilah had heard the whispers. Everyone who worked at the Sapphire Room knew the Castellano name. They owned half the shipping docks in Washington. Controlled construction contracts that built the city's skyline. The newspapers called them entrepreneurs. The streets called them kings of the underworld. She approached the table with a steady hand despite her hammering pulse. Isabella's voice was rust and razors. "You are too harsh, Dante. Family requires forgiveness." "Family requires loyalty, Mama." His voice was a low baritone that traveled through Delilah's chest cavity. "Betrayal is cancer. It must be cut out before it spreads." Delilah poured water into Isabella's glass, the liquid catching light like liquid diamonds. The old woman's eyes lifted. For one brief second the invisible waitress was seen. Isabella offered a smile that carried decades of exhaustion. "Thank you, child." The words slipped out before Delilah could stop them. "You're welcome, ma'am." Dante's gaze snapped to her. Cold, assessing. The kind of look that catalogued every detail and filed it away for future use. His mouth opened probably to reprimand her for the breach of protocol when sound shattered the quiet murmur of expensive conversation. A gasp. Wet. Desperate. The kind of intake that comes when oxygen becomes a luxury instead of a given. Delilah froze. She looked down. Isabella Castellano was clutching her throat. Her face, pale moments before, was turning a terrifying shade of beetroot red, then rapidly shifting toward violet. The crystal glass in her hand shattered against the table shards, scattering like hail across white linen. "Mama!" Dante shot upward. His chair clattered backward, the crash lost beneath Isabella's strangled choking sounds. Isabella couldn't speak. Her hands clawed at air, at her throat, at nothing. Her eyes rolled back, showing too much white. "Help her! Someone help her!" Dante's roar carried through the dining room like a detonation. The bodyguards swarmed in immediately, but their training was for external threats. They stared at their employer's mother with the helpless panic of men who knew how to kill, but not how to heal. Their hands hovered over weapons that were useless against cardiac arrest. The restaurant went silent. Not the comfortable quiet of discretion, but the awful stillness of collective breath-holding. Delilah's gaze swept the room. She saw Dr. Marcus Brennan at table 4. Seattle's most celebrated neurosurgeon avert his eyes and study his wine glass with sudden fascination. She saw State Senator Patricia Valdez at table 9 pull out her phone, filming instead of helping. She saw a room full of people who could afford the best medical care in the world collectively decide that watching was safer than acting. They were afraid, all of them. If they tried to help and failed, if the matriarch of the Castellano family died under their hands, the consequences would be measured in blood and broken bones. Delilah should have backed away, should have let Barrett call 911 like protocol demanded. She wasn't a nurse anymore. She was a waitress with half a nursing degree and empty pockets, and a mother who needed her to stay invisible, stay employed, stay safe. But she saw Isabella's eyes, terrified, the universal look of someone watching their own death approach and finding themselves utterly alone. The water pitcher hit the marble floor. The sound was a gunshot in the silence, crystal exploding into 1,000 glittering fragments. "Move!" Delilah's voice cut through the panic like a scalpel through skin. She shoved past a bodyguard who outweighed her by 100 pounds. His hand moved toward his weapon on instinct, but shock kept him frozen as this slip of a waitress in a black vest pushed him aside like he weighed nothing. "I said move!" Dante turned on her, his face a mask of fury and terror. "What do you think? She's in cardiac arrest, not choking." Her heart stopped. Delilah's training overrode her fear, made her voice clinical, certain. The lack of wheezing, the sudden color change, the way Isabella's body was going limp. These weren't choking symptoms. This was the heart giving up. Delilah didn't wait for permission. Permission would come too late. She grabbed Isabella's shoulders and pulled. The elderly woman was dead weight, muscle control gone, and Delilah had to use her full body strength to drag her from the curved booth onto the floor. The velvet dress tore. The pearl necklace caught on something and snapped, sending expensive white beads scattering across tiles like hail across asphalt. "Don't touch her!" One of the guards drew his weapon. The barrel pointed at Delilah's head with trembling precision. "Let her work." Dante's voice cracked on the last word. He dropped to his knees beside Delilah, his hand hovering over his mother's face like he could will breath back into her lungs. "Save her. You save her, or I swear to God." Delilah tuned him out. She tuned out the gun, the whispers, Barrett's shrill voice screaming in the background about lawsuits and liability. Her world narrowed to the sternum beneath her hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. She interlaced her fingers, positioned her palms over the center of Isabella's chest, and pushed. Hard. Harder than felt right. Harder than looked safe. Ribs cracked. The sound was sickening, like stepping on dry twigs in a silent forest. Dante grabbed Delilah's arm, his grip bruising. "You're hurting her." Delilah ripped her arm free. She glared at the most dangerous man in Seattle with a ferocity that matched his own, fueled by adrenaline and desperation and 10 months of swallowing anger. "I'm keeping the blood flowing to her brain. If I stop, she dies. Do you want her dead?" His fingers loosened, released. Delilah saw it in his eyes. Then the recognition that this waitress, this nobody, was the only thing standing between his mother and a coffin. He saw the fire in her hazel eyes, the absolute certainty of someone who'd chosen to act while everyone else chose to watch. "Then let me go." He did. Delilah pumped Isabella's chest rhythmically. Staying alive. That was the tempo. 30 compressions. She tilted Isabella's head back, pinched her nose, sealed her mouth over the older woman's lips. The taste was expensive wine and decay lipstick and fear. Nothing. The chest didn't rise. Damn it! The curse slipped out unbidden. Delilah went back to compressions. Her arms burned. She'd been on a double shift 14 hours without a meal break because Barrett kept assigning her extra sections. Her muscles screamed in protest, lactic acid building shoulders threatening to give out. But she pushed through the pain, through the exhaustion, through the voice in her head that whispered this was hopeless, that Isabella Castellano was already gone. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. The room was deathly silent save for the wet sounds of CPR and Delilah's ragged breathing. Sweat beaded on her forehead, ran into her eyes, stung and blurred her vision. She blinked it away, kept counting, kept pushing. "She's gone," a guard whispered, his voice carrying in the terrible quiet. "Shut up." Dante roared, tears brimming in his eyes, threatening to spill over. "She is not gone." Delilah gritted her teeth. She put her entire body weight into the next compression, used gravity and desperation and every ounce of strength she had left. Isabella's body jerked. A gasp, horrible, ragged, beautiful, tore from her throat. Her eyes flew open, blind with panic, and she coughed, inhaling a massive, shuddering breath that rattled in her chest like chains. Delilah collapsed back onto her heels, trembling violently. "Turn her! Turn her on her side!" The words came out as a gasp, her vision spotting at the edges, black creeping in from exhaustion and shock. Dante moved immediately. His hands were gentle as he rolled his mother into the recovery position. Isabella was weeping softly, clutching her son's hand with desperate strength. "Lorenzo," she wheezed. The wrong name. Confusion. But her eyes were open. She was breathing. "I'm here, Mama." "I'm here." Dante looked up. His dark eyes locked onto Delilah. Delilah sat on the cold marble floor, her uniform stained with wine and floor grime, her hair escaping its bun in wild tendrils. She expected gratitude, expected relief. Instead, Dante Castellano looked at her with an intensity that felt like a physical weight pressing against her chest. He didn't smile. He stared at her as if she were a puzzle he needed to solve, or a threat he hadn't anticipated, or something valuable that had appeared in his hands without warning. "Ambulance is here." Barrett's voice carried from the entrance, shrill with terror. Paramedics rushed in with equipment and practiced efficiency, pushing Delilah aside without ceremony. The moment broke. The connections severed like a cut wire. Dante stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by an armor of ice and control. He looked down at Delilah as she sat among the scattered pearls and broken glass. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a money clip, and peeled off a stack of $100 bills. He dropped them in her lap like he was tipping a valet. "For your trouble." The words were cold, clinical, dismissive. Delilah stared at the money. $3,000, maybe more. It felt degrading. It felt like payment for a service rendered, not gratitude for a life saved. It reduced what had just happened to a transaction. "I didn't do it for the money." Her voice shook, but the words came out clear. Dante paused. He looked at her one last time, memorizing her face with the same intensity he'd used to watch his mother's struggle for breath. "Everyone does everything for money, signorina, or power." He turned and followed the stretcher carrying Isabella out into the rain, leaving Delilah sitting alone on the floor of Seattle's most expensive restaurant, covered in cash and humiliation, and the slowly dawning realization that she'd just saved the wrong person's life. The adrenaline crash hit 20 minutes later in Barrett Hughes's office. The room smelled of artificial pine and old coffee. Barrett sat behind a mahogany desk that was too large for the space, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief that had seen better days. Delilah stood before him, arms crossed over her chest to hide the tremor in her hands. "You understand my position, Miss Kane." Barrett didn't meet her eyes. "I saved her life." Delilah's voice came out incredulous, disbelieving. "The paramedic said if I hadn't started CPR immediately, she would have been brain dead before they arrived." "You assaulted a guest." Barrett's voice went shrill, defensive. "You touched Isabella Castellano. You broke her ribs. Do you have any concept of the liability?" "She was dying." "It doesn't matter." Barrett slammed his hand on the desk. The sound made Delilah flinch. "Our policy is strictly to call 911 and wait. You created a spectacle. You engaged directly with the Castellano family. We cannot have staff who attract that kind of attention. The Sapphire Room is a place of discretion." The cold pit opened in Delilah's stomach, the one that had been growing for 10 months, fed by unpaid bills and mounting desperation. "Are you firing me?" Barrett slid a white envelope across the desk. "I'm letting you go. Effective immediately. Here is your pay for the week plus 2 weeks severance. Consider it generous. $1,200. 2 weeks of minimum wage plus tips. Generous." Delilah took the envelope. She wanted to scream, wanted to throw his stapler at his sweating face, wanted to tell him exactly what she thought of his discretion and his policies and his wandering hands that had made the last 3 months a special kind of hell. Instead, she swallowed her pride like broken glass and turned on her heel. "Please leave through the back. I don't want the guests seeing you." The alley behind the Sapphire Room was freezing. The rain had turned to sleet that stung Delilah's cheeks like tiny needles. She didn't have a car. She'd sold it 3 months ago to cover her mother's dialysis when the insurance company decided the treatment was experimental and therefore not covered. She pulled her thin coat tighter and began the 3-mile walk to the apartment in East Harbor. The money counted itself in her head as she walked. $1,200 from Barrett. The $3,000 Dante had thrown at her like she was a beggar. She'd wanted to leave it on the floor, wanted to preserve some shred of dignity, but dignity didn't pay for kidney medication. Rent was $850, due in 4 days. Her mother's prescriptions were $400. The electric bill past due with a final notice was $150. Food for 2 people for a month if they were careful, if they ate a lot of rice and beans, maybe $200. She'd survive another month. Maybe 2 if she stretched every dollar until it screamed. But then what Barrett would spread the word. She'd touched a VIP without permission, created a scene, made the other guests uncomfortable. No high-end restaurant in Seattle would touch her resume. She'd be lucky to get hired at a chain diner, and those jobs paid half what the Sapphire Room had. By the time Delilah reached her apartment complex, a gray Soviet-style building, with a broken intercom and graffiti in 3 languages, she was soaked to the bone. Her feet were numb. Her fingers had lost sensation 15 minutes ago. She climbed 4 flights of stairs, each step heavier than the last, and unlocked the door to apartment 4B. "Mom, I'm home." Her voice came out softer than intended. Linda Kane was asleep on the threadbare sofa, the television flickering with the evening news on mute. She looked frail in a way that broke Delilah's heart every single day. Her mother's skin had the translucent quality of the chronically ill veins visible beneath the surface like rivers on a map. Her hair, once thick and dark, was now thin and gray. Delilah covered her with a blanket, the good one, the fleece throw they'd bought at Costco back when buying blankets was a luxury they could afford instead of a necessity they delayed. In the tiny kitchen, she filled the kettle and set it on the stove. While it heated, she stared out the window at the street below. A black SUV was parked across the street. Engine running, headlights off. Delilah frowned. Cars like that didn't park in East Harbor. This was Honda Civic territory, maybe a Ford pickup if someone was doing well. Black Cadillac Escalades with tinted windows belonged in the neighborhoods on the hill where people had driveways and security systems. She shook her head. Paranoia. She was shaken up seeing threats and shadows. The kettle whistled. She made tea, took a shower to wash off the smell of the Sapphire Room, and crawled into her small bed. Sleep came fast, a dark void that swallowed her whole. Bang, bang, bang. Delilah jolted awake, her heart hammered against her ribs hard enough to hurt. The room was pitch black. The digital clock on her nightstand read 3:17 in the morning. Bang, bang, bang. Someone was pounding on the front door, not knocking, pounding, the kind of percussion that suggested fists or battering rams. "Delilah, wake up!" Her mother's voice trembled from the living room. Delilah grabbed the baseball bat she kept under the bed, a relic from high school softball, the only thing of value she hadn't sold yet, and rushed out. Linda stood in the hallway, clutching her robe, her face pale with fear. "Who is it?" Delilah yelled through the door. "Miss Kane, open the door!" A deep voice, male, calm, authoritative, the kind of voice that brooked no argument and expected compliance. "I'm calling the police." "We are not the police, and if you call them, things will become complicated. Mr. Castellano requests your presence." The blood drained from Delilah's face. The bat suddenly felt useless in her hands. If the Castellanos were at her door at 3 in the morning, a Louisville slugger was about as effective as a toothpick against a tank. "Delilah." Her mother's whisper was terrified. "What did you do?" "Nothing, Mom." Delilah kept her voice steady, tried to sound confident. "It's just a work thing, a misunderstanding from the restaurant." She set the bat down and opened the door. 2 men in dark suits filled the doorway. They were enormous. One of them was the bodyguard she'd shoved past at the restaurant. He looked at her with a mixture of annoyance and grudging respect. "Mr. Castellano wants to see you." Not a request, a statement of fact. "It's 3 in the morning." "Mr. Castellano operates on his own schedule." "And if I say no?" The guard smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. He glanced past Delilah at Linda, frail and trembling in the hallway. "Mr. Castellano insists. He would hate to have to insist harder." The threat was crystal clear. "Come with us, or we hurt your mother." Delilah dropped the bat. "Let me get dressed. 2 minutes." She rushed to her room, pulled on jeans and a thick sweater and boots. Her phone had no signal, of course it didn't. They'd probably jammed it somehow. She walked back out and hugged her mother tight. "Mom, I have to go sort out a misunderstanding. I'll be back for breakfast. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone." "Delilah, I'm scared." Tears ran down Linda's face. "I know. I love you." Delilah stepped out into the hallway. The guards flanked her like she was a prisoner, escorting her down the stairs and out into the cold night. The black SUV she'd seen earlier was waiting at the curb, engine still running. The back door opened. Delilah climbed in. The interior was all leather and cigar smoke luxury that felt obscene after the poverty of her apartment. The door slammed shut. The lock engaged automatically. She was alone in the back seat. The partition to the driver was closed, tinted so dark she couldn't see through it. The car began to move, gliding through the potholed streets of East Harbor with a smoothness that suggested expensive suspension and a driver who knew how to navigate the city's worst neighborhoods without slowing down. Delilah looked out the tinted windows as familiar landmarks disappeared. They weren't heading downtown. They were heading west, toward the hills, where Seattle's wealthy built mansions with views of the Puget Sound. She remembered Dante Castellano's eyes, cold, calculating, the way he'd looked at her like she was a problem that needed solving. "Why does he want me?" she thought, panic rising in her throat like bile. "I saved his mother. You don't kill the person who saved your mother. Do you?" Unless she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to see. Unless they thought she'd done something to Isabella during those chaotic minutes on the floor. Unless saving a life in this world carried consequences she couldn't begin to understand. The car picked up speed, leaving the city lights behind, driving into the darkness of forest roads that wound up into the hills. Delilah Kane, the waitress who just wanted to pay her mother's medical bills, who'd traded her future for survival, who'd broken every rule to save a stranger's life, was about to step into a world where rules were written in blood and broken bones. And she had no idea if she was the guest of honor or the sacrifice. The car didn't stop until it reached wrought iron gates that looked like the entrance to purgatory. The Castellano estate was less a house and more a fortress disguised as a Tuscan villa. It perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, isolated and imposing, beautiful in the way a predator is beautiful, all clean lines and deadly purpose. Floodlights illuminated manicured grounds that probably cost more to maintain than Delilah's entire existence. She was marched through the main doors, boots clicking loudly on marble that reflected her distorted image back at her. The house was silent, but it felt like the silence of held breath of violence waiting for permission to unleash. They led her into a library that smelled of old paper brandy and gun oil. A fire crackled in a hearth large enough to roast a whole pig. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with thousands of books, leather spines embossed with gold lettering in languages Delilah couldn't read. Dante Castellano stood by the window staring out at the black ocean. He held a tumbler of amber liquid. He didn't turn around when the guard shoved Delilah into the room and closed the heavy oak doors, leaving her alone with him. Delilah's heart hammered so hard she could feel her pulse in her fingertips. "You live far from your work, Miss Kane?" His voice was low, conversational, like they were discussing weather instead of her impending death. "I live where I can afford." "Why am I here? Am I being arrested or executed?" Dante turned. The firelight caught the sharp angles of his face, high cheekbones, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, eyes so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He took a sip of his drink, studying her over the rim of the glass. "If I wanted you dead, you never would have woken up." The statement was matter of fact, not a threat, just information. He walked to a massive desk and picked up a manila folder. He tossed it across the polished wood. It slid to a stop directly in front of her. "Open it." Delilah hesitated, then stepped forward. She flipped the folder open. Her breath caught in her throat. It was her life. All of it. Copies of her birth certificate, high school transcripts showing straight A's and a full scholarship to the University of Washington. Nursing school records, top 15% of her class until she'd withdrawn 10 months ago. Her mother's medical files from 3 different hospitals, pages and pages documenting Linda Kane's deteriorating kidney function. Overdue notices from Seattle City Light. An eviction warning dated 2 weeks ago that Delilah had hidden in a drawer so her mother wouldn't see it and worry herself into another health crisis. "You investigated me." The words came out as a whisper violation crawling across her skin like insects. "I investigate everyone who touches my family." Dante circled the desk to stand in front of her. He was tall, 6'2", maybe more, towering over her by a good 6 inches. The scent of sandalwood and something darker, something that might have been violence, enveloped her. "Delilah Kane, top of your nursing class, dropped out 10 months ago. Why?" "You can read. You know why." "I want to hear you say it." Delilah's jaw tightened. She closed the folder, meeting his gaze with defiance she didn't entirely feel. "Tuition or dialysis? I couldn't pay for both. So you chose your mother. Noble and stupid. It's not stupid to love someone. It is when it leaves you destitute and working for a tyrant like Barrett Hughes." Dante leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. "Here is the situation, Delilah. My mother is difficult. She does not trust doctors. She does not trust hospitals. She believes they are places where people go to die." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "Since the incident at the restaurant, she has refused to let any of my private medical staff near her. She claims they are cold and soulless. She asked for the girl with the sad eyes who broke her ribs." Delilah blinked. "She wants me. She insists on you. Says you have good hands. I don't believe in such nonsense, but I believe in keeping my mother alive. Her condition is stable, but fragile. She needs 24-hour monitoring for the next month. I'm not a registered nurse. I didn't finish. I don't care about the piece of paper." Dante pushed off the desk, invading her personal space. "I saw what you did at the restaurant. You kept your head when trained men panicked. You made a decision while everyone else chose cowardice." He took a step closer. The scent of sandalwood intensified. "I am offering you a job. Live here. Watch over Isabella. Ensure she takes her medication, eats properly, doesn't hide her pills in flower pots like a stubborn child." Dante snapped his fingers. The sound was sharp as a gunshot in the quiet library. "In exchange, I will clear your mother's medical debt. All $127,000 of it. I will also pay for a private nurse to visit Linda at your apartment twice a day so you don't have to worry about her while you're here. And I will pay you $15,000 a month for your time." The room spun. Delilah grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. It was the answer to every prayer she'd whispered into the dark for 2 years. It was freedom. It was her mother's life purchased with 30 days of servitude. It was escape from the crushing weight of debt that had turned her into someone she barely recognized. But it was also a trap. She could feel the teeth of it hidden beneath the velvet promise of financial salvation. "And if I say no?" Dante's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Then you walk out that door. You go back to your eviction notice. Your mother's dialysis treatment stopped next week when the hospital's charity fund runs dry. And I find someone else to force my mother to cooperate. It's your choice, Delilah, pride or survival." He knew exactly where to hit her. He'd done his research, cataloged every weakness, every pressure point. He was offering her a lifeline while simultaneously holding her mother's life hostage. Delilah's voice came out shaking but firm. "I have conditions." Dante raised an eyebrow, something like amusement flickering across his face. "You are in no position to negotiate, Tesoro. I want to see my mother every weekend. And I want half the money deposited into her account up front, so I know this isn't a lie." The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Dante stared at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Then the corner of his mouth twitched upward, not quite a smile, but close. "Done." He extended his hand. "Welcome to the family, Miss Kane." Delilah took his hand. His grip was warm rough with calluses she hadn't expected, and when their palms touched, electricity shot up her arm. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Dante released her, stepping back like he'd touched something hot. She had just sold her soul to the devil, and she prayed she'd survive long enough to spend the check. 3 weeks later, Delilah had learned that golden cages were still cages. Her room was larger than her entire apartment in East Harbor. It had a balcony overlooking the cliffs, a bathroom with heated marble floors, and a closet full of clothes in her exact size that had appeared without explanation. The food was prepared by a chef who'd worked in Michelin-starred restaurants in New York. The sheets were Egyptian cotton with a thread count she couldn't pronounce, but there were armed guards at every exit, cameras in every hallway, and the constant gnawing awareness that she was a prisoner dressed in silk instead of chains. Isabella Castellano, however, was a revelation. Away from the public eye, the matriarch was nothing like the severe woman who'd sat at table 9. She was warm, sharp-witted, and stubborn in a way that reminded Delilah of her own mother. She treated Delilah less like hired help and more like the granddaughter she'd never had. "Eat, Delilah, you are too thin." Isabella pushed a plate of cannoli across the sunroom table. They were sitting surrounded by orchids, afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the ocean. Delilah checked Isabella's blood pressure with practiced efficiency. "I'm fine. You need to watch your sugar. 130/85. Better than last week." "Dante needs a wife." Delilah choked on her water. "Excuse me." Isabella's eyes sparkled with mischief. "He is 34, darker than the night. He needs light. Needs someone who doesn't care about his money or his power. Someone who sees the man underneath the monster." She looked at Delilah with pointed significance. "He's a criminal, Isabella." Delilah kept her voice low, glancing around to make sure no guards were within earshot. "He is a businessman, and you are the only person in this house besides me who isn't afraid of him." Before Delilah could respond, the heavy doors opened. Dante walked in wearing a charcoal suit, but his tie was loosened, and he looked exhausted. There was a smudge of something dark on his cuff that Delilah hoped was wine, but suspected was blood. "How is she?" He directed the question at Delilah, not his mother. "She's fine. Stubborn. She tried to hide her pills in the orchid pot again." Dante let out a short, dry laugh. It was a rare sound, unexpected enough that Delilah felt something shift in her chest. He walked over and kissed Isabella's forehead with a tenderness that seemed at odds with everything Delilah knew about him. "Behave, Mama." "I am bored, Enzo. Come play chess with me. I have work to do. Just one game. Or are you afraid I will beat you again?" Dante sighed, running a hand through his hair. He sat down at the antique chess table in the corner, his large frame making the delicate chair look like a child's toy. "Fine. One game." Delilah meant to leave, should have left. But she found herself lingering by the door, watching. Dante played with aggressive, predatory efficiency. He moved his pieces like he moved his soldiers through the city, sacrificing pawns to control the center, using knights for devastating flanking attacks. Within 10 minutes, he had Isabella cornered. Checkmate in 3. His voice was soft, almost apologetic. Isabella sighed and toppled her king. "I am too tired for strategy. Delilah, you play him." Dante looked up, a slight smirk on his face. "I don't think Miss Kane knows how to play." Something ignited in Delilah's chest. The same spark of defiance that had made her shove a 250-pound bodyguard to save Isabella's life. She'd grown up playing chess with her father in Volunteer Park before he died. Thomas Kane had been a high school history teacher with a passion for strategy games. He'd taught her that chess wasn't about power, it was about patience, about seeing 3 moves ahead while your opponent was still thinking 1 move back. "I know how the pieces move." Dante gestured to the chair opposite him, that smirk still playing at his lips. "Humor me." Delilah sat down, reset the board, chose black. Dante opened with the king's pawn. Aggressive, standard, the move of someone used to dictating the pace of engagement. Delilah countered with the Sicilian defense, the most aggressive response to White's most aggressive opening. Dante paused, really looked at her for the first time since sitting down. "You know theory." "I know enough." The room went quiet except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. Isabella settled into the sofa with a book, but Delilah could feel the older woman's attention on them. Dante played fast, trying to intimidate her with speed and confidence. Delilah played slow, deliberate. She let him take her bishop, let him pressure her queen, let him think he was winning. "You're losing Miss Kane." His voice carried a hint of smugness as he moved his knight into what looked like a devastating position. "You're exposed." "Am I?" Delilah moved a single pawn, just 1 square forward. Dante frowned. He studied the board, then studied it again. His eyes widened fractionally. That 1 pawn move had opened a diagonal for her rook, trapping his king against his own defenses. If he moved his queen to save the king, he'd lose his knight and his tempo. If he didn't, it was checkmate in 4 moves. "Zugzwang," he whispered. A German chess term for being forced to move when any move worsens your position. He looked up at her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that made Delilah's pulse quicken. Curiosity. Respect. Something that might have been attraction if either of them had been foolish enough to acknowledge it. "Who taught you?" "My father. He cleaned floors at the University of Washington for 20 years, but he read every book in the library during his lunch breaks. He taught me that the person sweeping the floor sees the dirt everyone else steps over." Something flickered across Dante's face, an emotion Delilah couldn't quite name. He sat back, steepling his fingers. "I resign." Isabella clapped from the sofa. "I told you, Enzo, she is special." Dante didn't look at his mother. He kept his gaze fixed on Delilah, his eyes traveling from her mouth to her eyes and back again. "Yes, she is." For a moment Delilah forgot he was a criminal, forgot the guns and the guards and the blood on his cuff. She just saw a man who'd finally found someone who could match him, move for move. "Again," he challenged. "I need to check your mother's vitals." "Later then." It sounded like a threat, and a promise. 2 weeks later the atmosphere in the house changed like a storm front moving in. The Castellanos were hosting their annual charity gala at the estate. It was a front, of course, Delilah understood that now. It was a summit for the 5 families who controlled the West Coast's criminal underworld disguised as a fundraiser for ocean conservation. "You will attend." Dante found her in the garden that morning where she'd been reading while Isabella napped. Delilah looked up from her book. "I'm the nurse, not a show pony. You are my mother's caretaker and she will be attending for 1 hour. You need to be by her side." He paused, his gaze traveling over her jeans and sweater with something that might have been disapproval or might have been something else entirely. "And you cannot wear that." An hour later a stylist arrived with a garment bag. The dress was emerald silk that caught the light and held it, backless with a slit that went to mid-thigh. It was modest enough to pass as professional, sexy enough to stop conversations mid-sentence. When Delilah walked down the grand staircase that evening, the ballroom fell silent for exactly 2 seconds. The space was filled with dangerous men in tuxedos and women with smiles sharp enough to draw blood. Crystal chandeliers threw light across marble floors. A string quartet played something classical and vaguely threatening. Dante stood at the bottom of the stairs talking to a man with a thick gray mustache, Don Salvatore from the Las Vegas territory, if Delilah had overheard correctly. Dante looked up, stopped talking mid-sentence. His eyes tracked her descent with an intensity that made her skin flush. She reached the bottom. "Mr. Castellano." "Delilah." His voice dropped an octave rough at the edges. "You look adequate." High praise. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. Then his expression hardened all business again. "Stay with my mother, and stay away from the man in the white suit over there." He nodded discreetly toward a sleek, oily-looking man near the bar. "That's Lucian Voss. He's a snake." "Noted." Delilah found Isabella holding court on a velvet sofa, looking regal in deep purple. The older woman's eyes lit up when she saw Delilah. "You look like a movie star child. Sit, sit!" The night wore on. Champagne flowed. Delilah kept close watch on Isabella, monitoring her breathing, making sure she didn't drink alcohol or overexert herself. Around 10 o'clock, a young waiter approached their table with a tray. "Water for the Signora." He was young, mid-20s, with nervous eyes. His hand shook slightly as he set the glass down. Delilah watched him. She'd spent years working in restaurants. She knew the look of a waiter who was overwhelmed by a busy section, and she knew the look of a waiter hiding something. This was the latter. Isabella reached for the glass. "Wait." The word came out sharper than Delilah intended. Isabella paused, her fingers hovering over the crystal stem. Delilah leaned in close. The water looked clear, but there was a faint film on the surface barely visible, and a smell subtle, almost masked by the lemon wedge on the rim. Bitter almonds, or something chemical trying to mimic bitter almonds. Her nursing training kicked in. Cyanide smelled like bitter almonds, but this wasn't cyanide. The film suggested crushed pills. Digitalis, maybe? Or something designed to trigger another cardiac event. "Don't drink that." Delilah's voice was low, urgent. "Delilah, I am thirsty." "I said don't." Delilah grabbed the glass before Isabella could protest. She looked around. The nervous waiter was already retreating quickly toward the kitchen doors, moving too fast for someone who'd just delivered water. "Isabella, stay here. Don't eat or drink anything else." "Where are you going?" Delilah didn't answer. She stood and followed the waiter, weaving through the crowd with single-minded focus. She shouldn't have been doing this. Should have found Dante, let the professionals handle it. But her body was moving on instinct, driven by the same impulse that had made her perform CPR on a stranger while everyone else watched. She slipped through the kitchen doors. The space was controlled chaos: chefs plating appetizers, servers grabbing trays, someone screaming in French about undercooked fish. She spotted the nervous waiter heading for the back exit that led to the gardens. Delilah followed him outside into the cool night air. The party sounds faded, replaced by the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. The waiter was fumbling with his phone, dialing with shaking fingers. "It's done," he hissed into the device. "She drank it. The old woman is finished." Ice flooded Delilah's veins. He'd tried to kill Isabella. Again. Someone wanted the Castellano matriarch dead badly enough to try twice in 3 weeks. She looked around. No guards here. They were all positioned at the front of the estate, watching the guests. The waiter turned and saw her. His eyes widened. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a switchblade, the metal catching moonlight. "You shouldn't have followed me out here." Delilah's heart hammered. She wasn't a fighter, wasn't trained in combat, but she'd grown up in East Harbor, where you learned to handle yourself or you didn't survive. She'd fought off drunk men who thought waitresses were free entertainment, had pepper-sprayed a mugger who'd cornered her outside a grocery store 2 years ago. But this was different. This was a professional killer with a blade and nothing to lose. "Who sent you?" She tried to keep her voice steady. "Does it matter?" He lunged. Delilah dodged. The blade sliced through the air inches from her silk dress, close enough that she felt the wind of its passage. She scrambled backward, her heel catching on something. She stumbled, grabbing at a stone garden ornament to keep from falling. He lunged again. The gunshot shattered the night like breaking glass. The waiter froze. A small red hole appeared in the center of his forehead. He crumpled to the grass, dead, before he registered what had happened. Delilah screamed, dropping the ornament. She spun around. Dante stood 10 feet away, a smoking pistol in his hand. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage, but the rage wasn't directed at the corpse. It was directed at the situation, at the danger, at the fact that someone had gotten this close to his family again. He holstered the gun and crossed the distance in 2 strides. He grabbed Delilah by the shoulders, his grip hard enough to bruise. "Did he touch you?" The words came out as a roar, shaking her slightly. "Did he touch you?" "No, I'm fine. He put something in your mother's water. I stopped her from drinking it. I followed him." Dante froze. His eyes searched her face, looking for the truth, finding it. Then, without warning, he pulled her into his chest. The hug was desperate, crushing. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling her scent like he needed it to breathe. His whole body was trembling with adrenaline and fear, and something else Delilah couldn't name. "You saved her again," he whispered into her hair, his breath hot against her skin. "God help me, you saved her again." Delilah felt his heart hammering against hers, felt the tremor in his hands. For the first time she understood that the monster wasn't made of stone. He was terrified. Had been terrified since the moment his mother collapsed at the Sapphire Room. Her hands came up tentatively, resting on his chest. "Dante." He pulled back his hands, cupping her face with surprising gentleness. His eyes searched hers. The adrenaline was still high, the danger still visceral. His gaze dropped to her lips. "We have to go inside." His voice was hoarse, strained. "Lock down the estate. Someone on the inside let him in." "Who?" "I don't know, but I will burn this city to find them." He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. The gesture felt intimate, possessive. "Stay with me, Delilah. Do not leave my side. Tonight you are not the nurse. You are mine." They walked back toward the mansion, leaving the body in the shadows. Delilah realized 2 things simultaneously. First, someone powerful wanted the Castellanos destroyed. This wasn't random violence. This was coordinated assassination. Second, she was no longer just an observer in this world. She was a target, and she was falling for the man who'd put that target on her back. The estate went into full lockdown. Steel shutters descended over windows, turning the elegant villa into a fortress. Dante Castellano transformed from a man into a hurricane of orders and controlled violence. He had 20 men scouring the grounds, checking every camera feed, every phone log, every piece of data they could extract from the estate's security systems. The remaining gala guests were politely but firmly escorted off the property by armed guards who made it clear that arguing would be unwise. Delilah sat in the library, the same room where Dante had first offered her the deal 3 weeks ago. A blanket was wrapped around her shoulders despite the fire roaring in the hearth. She was freezing from the inside-out shock, settling in now that the adrenaline had drained away. She'd seen a man die tonight, had almost been stabbed. The emerald dress that had made her feel like someone else, someone powerful, was now torn and stained with grass and dirt. The doors opened. Dante entered, having shed his tuxedo jacket and rolled up his sleeves. The movement revealed tattoos that curled around his forearms, symbols in Latin and Italian imagery of loyalty and death and family above all else. He walked straight to the bar, poured 2 glasses of brandy, and brought one to her. "Drink." Delilah took the glass. Her hands shook so badly the liquid rippled and sloshed. Dante crouched in front of her, his eyes level with hers. Up close she could see the exhaustion in his face, the fear he'd never show his men but couldn't quite hide from her. "I'm sorry, Delilah. I dragged you into this hell." "You didn't drag me. I walked in. I needed the money. And now—" His voice was quiet, dangerous. "You have the money. Half of it is in your mother's account. You could leave. I could put you on a plane to anywhere in the country tonight. New name, new identity. You would be safe." Delilah looked at him, really looked at him. At the man who'd burned with fear when he thought she might be hurt. At the man who'd played chess with her like she was an equal instead of an employee. At the man who kissed his mother's forehead with tenderness that contradicted every rumor about his capacity for violence. She thought about the lonely apartment in East Harbor, about the invisible life of a waitress, about the crushing weight of survival that had made her small and scared and desperate. "I'm not leaving Isabella." A pause. Her voice steadied. "And I'm not leaving you." Dante's eyes closed for a second like the words caused him physical pain. When he opened them again, something had shifted. A decision made. He leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, a collision of fear and desire and the electric tension that had been building since the night he'd watched her save his mother's life. His hands tangled in her hair, her fingers gripped his shirt, pulling him closer. For a few seconds, while armed men patrolled the perimeter and searched for traitors, the library became a sanctuary where the rest of the world couldn't reach them. Then Dante's phone buzzed. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. He pulled back, breathing hard. "I have to." "I know." He stood straightening his shirt, becoming the Don again, but before he left, he looked back at her. "Lock the door after me. Don't open it for anyone except me or Hayes." Hayes Blackwell, the head of security. 50 years old, built like a tank with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite by someone angry at the stone. "I'll be fine." Dante left. Delilah locked the door as instructed. She sat back down, trying to process everything that had happened. The kiss, the danger, the realization that she'd crossed a line from which there was no return. At 4 in the morning, the alarm didn't sound. It simply died. The lights in the library went out. Emergency backup lights should have kicked in. They didn't. Delilah's heart stopped. She heard Dante's voice from somewhere in the house, muffled by walls and distance. "Stay down." Then gunfire. Not the single shot that had killed the waiter. This was automatic weapons, the rapid-fire staccato of assault rifles. The library doors exploded inward, not from a key, from a small explosive charge that blew the lock to pieces. Flashbang grenades rolled across the floor. Delilah had half a second to cover her ears and close her eyes before the world turned into white light and deafening noise. The blast felt like it punched through her skull, rattling her teeth, making her inner ear scream. She couldn't see, couldn't hear, could barely think. Hands grabbed her, rough, professional. Someone kicked her in the ribs when she tried to resist, and the pain stole her breath. "Grab the girl, leave him." The voice cut through the ringing in her ears. Male, authoritative, familiar. Her vision started to clear, tears streaming down her face from the flashbang. She saw shapes moving through the smoke, men in tactical gear, at least 6 of them, and standing in the doorway, illuminated by the flashlights mounted on their rifles, was Hayes Blackwell, the man Dante trusted with his life, the head of security who'd been with the family for 9 years, the man who knew every entrance, every exit, every blind spot in the estate's defenses. The betrayal hit Delilah harder than the kick to her ribs. She saw Dante on the floor across the room, writhing from a taser hit. He'd managed to draw his weapon, had fired. 2 bodies lay near the overturned desk, but there had been too many. "Hayes!" Dante's voice was raw, fighting through the neuromuscular disruption. "Why?" Hayes stepped into the library, his face impassive. "Business boss. Lucian Voss pays better, and he promised me the Seattle territory when you're gone." He looked at Delilah, who was being hauled to her feet by 2 of his men. "Bring her. She's the insurance policy. If the old woman won't sign over the assets, we start sending pieces of the nurse back to her." Dante roared, trying to force his tased muscles to obey. "If you touch her, I will kill you. I will peel the skin from your bones." Hayes walked over and kicked Dante in the face. The sound was sickening. Blood sprayed across the Persian rug. "You have to catch me first, Enzo." Delilah fought. She bit one of the men holding her, tasted blood, clawed at another, felt her nails break, kicked with all her strength. But they were professionals, and she was a nurse who'd spent 10 months carrying plates of food. They dragged her out of the library, past the bodies of guards who'd been loyal to Dante, out into the cold night air where vehicles waited with engines running. The last thing she saw was Dante lying motionless on the rug, blood pooling around his head, his eyes open but unfocused. Then a hood went over her head, and the world went black. Delilah woke to the smell of salt and diesel fuel. The hood was gone. She was zip-tied to a metal chair in the center of a vast warehouse, shipping containers stacked around her like rusted skyscrapers. The sound of waves crashing against a dock echoed through the cavernous space, and somewhere overhead, gulls screamed their territorial disputes. Pier 47. She recognized it from the faded signage visible through gaps in the corrugated metal walls. This was the old cannery district, abandoned since the fishing industry had moved north 15 years ago. Footsteps approached, expensive shoes on concrete. Lucien Voss emerged from behind a stack of containers, immaculate in his white suit, despite the grime surrounding them. He held a silk handkerchief to his nose, like the warehouse smell offended his delicate sensibilities. Hayes Blackwell stood behind him, arms crossed, looking smug. "Miss Kane." Voss's voice was smooth as oil. "The waitress who plays doctor. I hear you're quite talented. You saved the old witch twice. A pity you won't be able to save yourself." Delilah's voice came out hoarse, her throat raw. "Where's Dante?" "Oh, he's alive, for now." Voss waved his hand dismissively. "Currently tearing Seattle apart looking for you, which is exactly what I want. He's reckless when he's emotional. He'll walk right into my trap." He pulled a chair from somewhere and sat opposite her, crossing his legs with studied elegance. "Here is the plan, Delilah. I will call Dante. Tell him to come here alone to trade his life for yours. He will come, he's predictable that way. He'll sign over all Castellano territories to me. And then, well..." Voss smiled. "I hate loose ends." "He'll kill you. He's smarter than you think." Voss slapped her. The blow was sharp, calculated to hurt without leaving permanent damage. Blood filled her mouth, copper and salt mixing on her tongue. "Quiet, staff." He pulled out his phone and dialed. Put it on speaker. The line rang twice before connecting. "Voss." Dante's voice came through distorted, but underneath the static was something terrifying, a calm so absolute it could only come from someone who'd already decided how many people would die. "Enzo. I have your little nurse. She's very pretty. Would be a shame if she lost that pretty face." "Name the place." No negotiation, no pleading, just cold certainty. "Pier 47, the old cannery, alone. 1 hour or she dies." "I'm coming." The line went dead. Voss laughed, standing up and pocketing his phone. "Too easy. Hayes, get the men in position. Snipers on the catwalks. When he walks through those doors, I want him on his knees before he takes 3 steps." Hayes nodded and disappeared into the shadows. Delilah was alone with Voss and 2 guards who looked bored with babysitting duty. She tested the zip ties binding her wrists. The left one was slightly looser than the right. Whoever had secured her had been careless, more focused on speed than thoroughness. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Observe the board. Find the weakness. Every position has one." Her weakness was physical strength. She couldn't overpower armed men. Their weakness was arrogance. They saw a waitress, a woman, a nobody. They'd dismissed her the moment they'd captured her. Delilah began working her left wrist, twisting it slowly, painfully. The plastic cut into her skin, burning, drawing blood that made the tie slippery. She kept her face neutral, her breathing steady, giving no indication of what she was doing. 30 minutes crawled by. The warehouse filled with 20 armed men taking positions. Snipers climbed to the catwalks overlooking the main floor. Hayes moved among them, checking weapons, barking orders in a low voice that didn't carry. Then the heavy metal doors creaked open. A silhouette stood in the entrance, backlit by the gray Seattle morning. Dante walked in alone. Long black coat, hands raised, no visible weapons. "I'm here." His voice echoed off metal walls. "Let her go." Voss stepped out from behind a container, a pistol pointed at Delilah's head. "Welcome, Enzo. So noble." He gestured to a table that had been set up with documents. "Kneel." Dante's eyes found Delilah. She saw him catalog the bruise on her cheek, the blood at the corner of her mouth. Something dark and murderous flickered across his face before the mask of control slammed back into place. He slowly knelt on the filthy concrete. "Sign the papers. Then she walks." Dante reached into his coat, slowly, deliberately. "Slowly!" Hayes shouted from a catwalk above a rifle trained on Dante's chest. Dante pulled out a pen, but he didn't move toward the table. He looked at Delilah instead. Really looked at her. Delilah had freed her left hand 5 minutes ago. She kept it behind her back, fingers wrapped around a piece of broken rebar she'd found wedged between the chair and the floor. She tapped her index finger against the metal. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm they'd established during late nights in the library when insomnia had kept them both awake. The Queen moves. "I'm not signing." Voss cocked the gun, pressing the barrel against Delilah's temple. "Then she dies." "Now," Delilah screamed. She ripped her right hand free. The blood had made it slippery enough, and swung the rebar at the nearest guard's knee. The crack was audible. He went down screaming. Dante threw the pen. It wasn't a pen. It was a miniature flashbang military grade, the kind special forces used for close quarters breaching. The explosion was blinding light, and deafening thunder compressed into a space the size of a grenade. Delilah had closed her eyes and covered her ears the instant before detonation. The guards hadn't. They stumbled backward, temporarily blind, weapons swinging wildly. Dante didn't run away from the danger. He ran toward it. He tackled Voss before the man's vision cleared, slamming him into the concrete hard enough to crack bone. The pistol skittered across the floor. "Kill him!" Hayes's voice from above was raw panic. Gunfire erupted from the catwalks. Bullets sparked against concrete, ricocheting in deadly patterns. Delilah dove behind a shipping container. But she wasn't just hiding. She was looking for weapons for advantage for the opening her father had taught her to find. She saw it. A forklift parked 20 feet away, keys still in the ignition. Dante was fighting Voss hand to hand, a brutal exchange of fists and rage. But the snipers had him pinned bullets, forcing him to stay low to prioritize cover over offense. Hayes was taking aim for a killshot rifle, steady breathing, controlled. Delilah ran for the forklift. Bullets chased her, sparks exploding off metal as she sprinted. She dove into the seat, jammed the key, and the diesel engine roared to life with a belch of black smoke. "Hey, up there!" Hayes looked down, confusion crossing his face. Delilah slammed the forklift into the support scaffolding Hayes was standing on. The impact was tremendous, metal shrieking as welds broke and bolts sheared. The entire catwalk structure swayed like a tree in a hurricane. Hayes's eyes went wide. He tried to jump, but physics was already in motion. The tower collapsed. Hayes fell 20 feet, crashed through a stack of wooden pallets, and lay still in the splintered wreckage. The distraction gave Dante the opening he needed. He broke Voss's nose with a vicious headbutt, grabbed the fallen pistol, and rolled onto his back. 3 shots. 3 snipers dropped from the rafters, dead before they hit the ground. Silence fell over the warehouse. Dante stood up slowly, chest heaving, blood dripping from a cut above his eye. He walked to where Voss lay groaning, clutching his shattered face. He pointed the gun between Voss's eyes. "You threaten my family." Voss's voice came out nasal, broken. "Dante, wait, we can make a deal. The deal was my life for hers. You broke it." The gunshot was final. Dante dropped the weapon, turned. His eyes found Delilah sitting in the forklift, covered in grease and dust, and her own blood shaking so hard her teeth chattered. He crossed the distance in long strides, didn't say a word, just lifted her bodily from the machine and crushed her against his chest, arms wrapped around her like he could hold her together through sheer force of will. He buried his face in her neck, breathing her in like oxygen. "You crazy woman." His voice broke on the words. "You attacked a sniper tower with a forklift." Delilah sobbed, finally letting the tears come. "I saw an opening. I took it." Dante pulled back just enough to look at her face. His hands cupped her jaw with surprising gentleness given the violence he'd just committed. "You're not a waitress. You're a queen." Sirens wailed in the distance. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. Dante's men finally arriving now that the danger had passed. Or maybe they'd been waiting for his signal all along, positioned as backup he'd never mentioned to Voss. Delilah's legs gave out. Dante caught her, lifting her like she weighed nothing. But as they passed Hayes's broken body in the wreckage, Delilah saw something that made ice flood her veins. Hayes's hand moved, just slightly, and his eyes, though glazed with pain, tracked their movement. "Dante!" Hayes's voice was a wet rasp. "Not Rowan, never Rowan." Dante stopped, set Delilah down carefully, but kept one arm around her waist. "What?" Hayes coughed, blood bubbling at his lips. "Your uncle. Innocent. I framed him. Made it look like he ordered the hits. But the real mastermind—" He coughed again, harder. More blood. "Graves. Silas Graves. He's been pulling strings for years. Since Elena died. He blames your father. This was just the opening move." Dante's face went white. "Silas Graves is dead. My father killed him 15 years ago." Hayes managed something that might have been a laugh if it wasn't so full of pain. "Check again, boss. Man's been in Portland this whole time, building an army. Voss was just a pawn. Rowan was supposed to be the scapegoat. Pin everything on him. Tear the family apart from inside." He grabbed Dante's wrist with surprising strength for a dying man. "I was loyal, always, undercover in Silas's network for 9 years. Had to make it look real. Had to let him think he'd turned me. Only way to get close enough to learn the plan." His grip loosened. His eyes started to lose focus. "Warehouse, on Alaskan Way, Pier 91. That's where Silas is. Going after Isabella tonight. Finish what he started." Hayes's hand fell away. His chest stopped moving. Dante stood frozen, processing. Then he pulled out his phone and barked orders. "Get 20 men to the estate, full lockdown, and send a team to Pier 91. I want eyes on every entrance." He looked at Delilah. "Can you walk?" "Yes." "Good, because we're not done yet." The drive back to the estate took 17 minutes of Dante breaking every traffic law in Washington state. Delilah sat in the passenger seat, one of Dante's jackets wrapped around her shoulders, watching Seattle blur past the windows. Her mind was racing. Hayes had been loyal, had sacrificed 9 years of his life maintaining deep cover, had let himself be suspected, had played the traitor convincingly enough to fool Voss completely. And Silas Graves, a man supposedly dead for 15 years, was alive and orchestrating a revenge plot so complex it had taken nearly a decade to set in motion. "Tell me about Elena," Delilah said quietly. Dante's hands tightened on the steering wheel. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. She was brilliant, kind, everything this life wasn't supposed to produce. His voice went flat, emotionless in the way that meant he was feeling too much to show it. "Silas Graves was my father's partner in the early days. They built the Seattle operation together. Silas had a daughter, Elena. When she turned 18, they fell in love. It was wrong on every level. But love doesn't care about levels." Delilah's breath caught. She understood now. The kind of betrayal that could fuel 15 years of revenge. "My mother found out," demanded Dominic end it. He refused. Dante's jaw clenched. "Elena died in a car accident 8 months later. Went off a bridge on Highway 90. Brake failure. Dominic spiraled afterward. Became paranoid violent. Died of a heart attack 3 years later. Silas disappeared before my father could find him. Everyone assumed he'd fled the country. But he stayed, and he's been planning this whole time. Apparently." They pulled through the gates of the estate. Armed guards were everywhere, transforming the elegant villa into an armed fortress. Isabella stood on the front steps, Dante's uncle Rowan beside her, both of them safe but shaken. Dante was out of the car before it fully stopped. He embraced his mother, then turned to Rowan. "I owe you an apology. Hayes framed you. Made it look like you were the traitor." Rowan's face was hard. "I know. Your men told me. Where is he?" "Dead. But he died loyal. Was undercover the whole time." Rowan absorbed this, nodded once. "Then we honor his sacrifice by finishing this." Delilah climbed out of the car, her legs still unsteady. Isabella came to her immediately, wrapping her in a hug that smelled of lavender and expensive perfume. "Child, thank God you're safe." "I'm fine, but Isabella, we need to talk. Privately." They went to Isabella's sitting room. Delilah closed the door, her heart pounding. The question had been building since Dante had told her about Elena in the car. "Your husband, Dominic, was he involved with Silas Graves's daughter?" Isabella's face didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Old pain, old guilt. "Yes." "And the car accident? That wasn't an accident, was it?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm opening in the earth. Then Isabella sat down heavily in the antique chair by the window, looking every one of her 67 years, and then some. "I was younger then, angrier. Dominic humiliated me, flaunted his affair with a girl young enough to be his daughter, brought her to family functions, talked about leaving me for her." Her hands trembled in her lap. "I wanted to hurt him the way he'd hurt me. I arranged the brake failure on Elena's car. I thought she would be injured, shaken, that Dominic would end the relationship to keep her safe, that he would remember he had responsibilities, a family, a wife who'd stood beside him for 20 years. Isabella's voice cracked. "I didn't mean for her to die. The mechanic I hired, he was supposed to make it subtle, just enough to cause a fender bender. But he was drunk when he did the work. The brakes failed completely on the bridge. Elena went through the guardrail doing 60 miles an hour. The car sank in the Sound. They didn't recover her body for 3 days." Delilah stepped back. The woman she'd come to love like a grandmother, the woman who'd pushed cannoli across the table and played matchmaker and treated her with such warmth, suddenly looked like a stranger wearing Isabella's face. A murderer. "You killed an innocent girl because your husband humiliated you." Delilah's voice came out flat, cold. "You let Dominic take the blame. Let him die carrying your guilt. And you've been playing the loving matriarch for 11 years while Silas hunted ghosts." Isabella flinched like she'd been slapped. "I know what I am, child. I know what I did. Every night for 11 years I see Elena's face in my dreams. I hear the news reports about the brake failure. I live with the knowledge that I am a monster wearing pearls and velvet." She stood slowly, her hands shaking so hard she had to grip the chair back for support. "But I also know I cannot undo it. I can only try to balance the scales. The foundation, the foster children, the free clinics, none of it brings Elena back. None of it erases what I did. But maybe if I spend every remaining day trying to save the lives I can, God will show me a fraction of the mercy I denied that girl." Delilah's throat tightened. This wasn't absolution. This was a woman drowning in guilt, trying to buy redemption one charitable act at a time, trying to save enough lives to offset the one she'd taken. "Dante needs to know the truth, all of it." "I know. And after this is over, you're going to tell Silas yourself, before he goes to prison. He deserves to know who really killed his daughter." Isabella closed her eyes. A tear ran down her cheek, tracking through expensive makeup. "I will." "Then we help you end it. Not because you're forgiven, because innocent people shouldn't die for your mistakes." Isabella opened her eyes, met Delilah's gaze with something that looked like gratitude mixed with shame. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I am not doing this for you. I'm doing it for Dante, and for all the people Silas will hurt if we don't stop him." They brought the plan to Dante 20 minutes later. Rowan joined them in the war room, a soundproof office in the basement where the Castellano family had made decisions for 3 generations. Dante listened in silence as Delilah laid it out. His face was unreadable. "Absolutely not. Too dangerous." "It's the only way to draw him out," Delilah argued. "Silas won't come himself unless he thinks Isabella is vulnerable. We fake a medical emergency, spread the word she's in critical condition at Harborview Medical Center. When Silas comes to finish the job, he'll have an army with him, and you want to put my mother in the middle of it." "I want to end this." Isabella's voice was steel underneath the tremor. "Silas has been a ghost for 11 years. If we don't force his hand now, he'll disappear again. Regroup. Come back when we're not ready. Next time we might not see him coming." Dante looked between the two women in his life, the mother who'd raised him, the woman who'd saved her twice and stolen his heart in the process. "If I agree to this insanity, we do it my way. Full tactical team, bulletproof glass in the hospital room, armed guards disguised as medical staff. And Delilah," he turned to her, "you stay far away from the hospital. You've done enough. I'm a nurse. I should be there to make it look convincing. You're also the woman I love, and I'm not risking you again." The words hung in the air. Dante's eyes widened slightly, like he hadn't meant to say them out loud, like the confession had slipped past his defenses in a moment of fear and exhaustion. Delilah's heart stopped, then started again faster, harder. "You don't get to make that choice for me." "The hell I don't. I can help. I know medications know how to make it look convincing. And if something goes wrong, you'll need someone there who can actually keep Isabella stable." "No," Isabella interrupted. "She comes Dante, or I don't cooperate." Dante swore in Italian, a long string of words that Delilah didn't need to understand to know were profane. "You're both insane." "We learned from the best," Delilah shot back. He glared at her, then slowly his expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but the tension around his eyes softened fractionally. "Fine, but you stay in the monitoring room, behind 2 layers of security, behind bulletproof glass. And if shooting starts, you run. Understood?" "Understood." Harborview Medical Center, 8 hours later. The plan was in motion with the precision of a military operation. Word had spread through Seattle's underground that Isabella Castellano had suffered a massive stroke. She was in critical condition, room 412, 4th floor, with minimal security because the family was in disarray after Hayes's betrayal and Voss's death. All of it was lies. Beautiful, carefully constructed lies designed to draw a ghost out of hiding. Isabella lay in the hospital bed. Makeup artists, having aged her another decade, made her look truly near death. Monitors beeped with pre-programmed rhythms. IV lines ran into her arms, but the bags contained nothing but saline. The crisis was theater. The danger was real. Dante stood by the window watching the street below with predatory focus. He wore a doctor's coat over his bulletproof vest. Rowan was in the hallway, similarly disguised. 20 more men were positioned throughout the building, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. Delilah was in the monitoring room 2 floors up, watching camera feeds from every angle. Her palms were sweating despite the air conditioning. This had to work, because if Silas didn't take the bait, they'd lost their chance. He'd vanish back into whatever hole he'd hidden in for 15 years, and next time he surfaced, they might not be ready. At 11:47 p.m. the power went out. Emergency generators kicked in after 3 seconds of darkness. But 3 seconds was enough. When the lights came back, 6 men in paramedic uniforms were moving through the 4th floor hallway, pushing a gurney loaded with what looked like medical equipment. Dante's voice crackled through the comms. "Contact, 6 targets, moving to intercept." But before his men could engage, one of the paramedics pulled a pistol and shot a nurse in the leg. She went down screaming, clutching her thigh as blood spread across the white linoleum. "Stand down or we start killing civilians." Dante froze. His men froze. The calculus had changed. Silas had brought collateral damage as insurance, knowing the Castellanos wouldn't risk innocent lives. The paramedics, Silas's men, pushed through to room 412. 2 of them entered, while the others held positions in the hallway, guns trained on terrified hospital staff who'd gone from routine night shift to hostage situation in seconds. Delilah watched the feed from the room camera, saw one of the men approach Isabella's bed, saw him pull out a syringe filled with something clear that caught the fluorescent light. This was it, the moment of vulnerability, the bait in the trap. But something was wrong. The man's face. Delilah had seen a photo of Silas Graves in the file Dante had shown her earlier. Late 60s, gray hair, a scar running from his left eye to his jawline from a knife fight in his youth. This man was mid-40s, clean-shaven, no scar. "That's not Silas," Delilah breathed into her calm. "It's a decoy, a test." Dante's response was immediate. "Where is he?" Delilah's mind raced. If Silas wasn't at the hospital, where would he be? What was the real target? Then it hit her with the force of a physical blow, cold certainty flooding her veins like ice water. The estate. He's going after the estate while everyone's here, while the defenses are weakened. Dante swore. "Rowan, you have command. Full lockdown. I'm going back." "Dante, wait." But he was already moving, sprinting for the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the stairwell. Delilah abandoned the monitoring room, ignored the 2 guards who were supposed to keep her safe, who called after her in confusion, ran for the parking garage, her nurse's shoes slapping against polished hospital floors. She found Dante's car in the reserved section. He'd left the keys in it, overconfident or trusting, or maybe just in too much of a hurry to care about theft. She'd watched him drive enough times, had memorized the way he handled the machine like it was an extension of his body. She got in, started the engine. The Maserati roared to life, all 600 horsepower, responding to the lightest touch of the accelerator, and drove out of the garage before security could stop her, the tires squealing on the concrete ramp. The estate was 30 minutes away at legal speeds. Delilah made it in 18, pushing the Italian engine to its limits on the empty highway. She pulled through the gates to find chaos. The front doors were blown open, smoke pouring from the entrance like the house was exhaling violence. Gunfire echoed from inside, the rapid staccato of automatic weapons mixing with single shots from handguns. Delilah grabbed the emergency kit from the trunk, first aid supplies, because Dante was paranoid and prepared for everything, and ran toward the house. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed, but she kept running. She found Dante in the library, pinned down by suppressing fire from 3 directions. He'd taken a bullet to the shoulder, blood soaking through his shirt and the makeshift bandage he'd tied around it. His left arm hung useless at his side. Delilah didn't think, just acted on instinct and training. She grabbed a flashbang from a fallen guard's tactical vest, remembered how Dante had used one at the warehouse, how effective it had been, pulled the pin and threw it toward the nearest shooter. The explosion gave Dante the second he needed. He dropped 2 of Silas's men with precise shots from his right hand, compensating for the wounded left with practiced ease. The third came at him with a knife, closing the distance before Dante could adjust his aim. He was too slow, wounded, his reactions dulled by blood loss. Delilah tackled the man from the side. They went down in a tangle of limbs and desperation. He was stronger, better trained, and he had her on her back in seconds, knife raised to plunge down. A gunshot. The man's head snapped back. He collapsed on top of her dead weight that drove the air from her lungs. Delilah shoved him off with a strength born of adrenaline and terror, gasping for air. Dante stood above her pistol, smoking face pale from blood loss and shock. "I told you to stay at the hospital." "You're welcome." He helped her up with his good arm, wincing at the movement. "Where's Silas?" "Master bedroom. Looking for something in your father's safe." They ran upstairs, Dante leaving a blood trail on the marble, each drop a testament to how much he'd already lost. Found the bedroom doors open, the safe behind the Caravaggio painting blown open with precision explosives. Silas Graves stood by the window, a file folder in his hands. He was 64, gray-haired, with a scar that ran from his left eye to his jawline like someone had tried to split his face in half. He looked tired, ancient, like he'd been carrying rage for so long it had started to eat him from the inside out, consuming everything good until only vengeance remained. Dante Castellano. His voice was rough gravel, worn smooth by decades of cigarettes and whiskey. "You look like your father. Same eyes, same arrogance." Dante raised his gun with his right hand, compensating for the useless left. Put the folder down. "It's Elena's medical records, from the autopsy. I've been searching for them for 11 years. Your father had them sealed, hidden, made sure I could never prove the brake lines were cut deliberately." He looked at the documents with something like tenderness, like they were the last piece of his daughter he had left. "This is all I have left of her. Proof that she was murdered. Proof that Dominic Castellano destroyed my entire world and then hid the evidence. My father didn't kill Elena." Dante's voice was steady despite the blood loss. "My mother did." Silas froze. The folder slipped in his hands. "What?" Isabella arranged the accident. Dominic covered for her, took the blame, let you hunt him, let the guilt eat him alive until it killed him 3 years later. All to protect my mother. Delilah watched Silas's face crumble like a building imploding from the inside. 15 years of revenge, meticulously planned, perfectly executed, based on a target that had been wrong from the very beginning. "Isabella," he whispered. "It was always Isabella." He laughed. The sound was broken glass and bitter herbs, the laugh of a man who'd just realized his entire life had been a waste. "I've been hunting the wrong ghost." Dante's gun didn't waver despite his wound. "It's over, Silas. Drop the file. Come quietly. You'll get a trial, a lawyer, a chance to tell your story. A trial from the family that killed my daughter, from the woman who took everything from me." "I don't think so." He moved. Not toward Dante. Toward the window that overlooked the cliffs and the Pacific Ocean, 4 stories below. Dante fired. The shot took Silas in the leg, dropping him before he could reach the glass. The old man went down hard, the file scattering across the floor. Delilah ran forward, her nurse training overriding everything else. Fear, exhaustion, the awareness that this man had tried to kill everyone she loved. She applied pressure to the wound, pulled a tourniquet from the kit she'd brought, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. Silas looked up at her, pain and confusion warring in his eyes. "Who are you?" "Someone who understands what it's like to lose a father. But revenge doesn't bring them back. It just creates more bodies." Silas closed his eyes. "Tell Isabella. Tell her I hope it was worth it. Because she's going to live with what she did for the rest of her life, just like I have." Sirens wailed outside. Police probably, or Dante's reinforcements finally arriving, or both. Dante's men secured Silas, zip-tying his hands behind his back despite the leg wound. Paramedics arrived for both him and Dante, professional and efficient, loading them onto stretchers. The estate slowly transformed from a war zone back into something resembling a home, though the bullet holes and blood stains would take weeks to repair. Dawn broke over the Pacific 3 hours later, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that seemed obscene after the night's violence. Delilah sat on the balcony of her room watching the sunrise. Her hands were bandaged where she'd scraped them tackling Silas's man. Her ribs were bruised from hitting the floor. She'd been checked for a concussion, given antibiotics for various cuts, and told to rest. She hadn't rested. Couldn't. Her mind was still processing everything that had happened, everything she'd learned about Isabella, about the complexities of love and guilt, and the things people did when they felt betrayed. The door opened quietly. Dante walked in his left arm in a professional sling, fresh bandages visible beneath his shirt. He should have been in bed sleeping off the painkillers and the trauma, but here he was seeking her out instead of rest. "You should be in bed. So should you." He sat beside her, carefully mindful of his injuries. They watched the sunrise in silence for a while, the kind of comfortable quiet that only exists between people who've survived something terrible together. Silas is talking, giving up every contact, every operation, every piece of the network he built. He's done fighting. "And your mother? Alive, unharmed." Dante's voice carried a mixture of emotions Delilah couldn't quite parse. "She wants to see you later, has something she needs to tell me first, something about Elena." "I know, she already told me." Dante turned to look at her, surprise crossing his face. "What?" "She told me the truth, about arranging the brake failure, about letting your father take the blame, about 11 years of guilt eating her alive." More silence. Dante processed this, his jaw working. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it wasn't my truth to tell. It was hers. And she needs to be the one to face you with it." Dante stood up, walked to the railing, looked out at the ocean. "My whole life I thought my father was consumed by guilt over Elena, that his love for her destroyed him, but it was protecting my mother that killed him. Love makes us do terrible things sometimes, desperate things. Your mother made a choice born of pain and jealousy. Your father made a choice born of love and protection. Neither of them thought about the consequences. And Silas paid the price for both their choices. Delilah walked to stand beside him. We all pay prices for other people's choices. The question is what we do after. Your mother is trying to atone. Silas chose revenge. You get to choose something different. Dante turned to face her, used his good hand to cup her chin, making her look at him. You told me you loved me. At the hospital, before all this? I did. Did you mean it? Delilah's throat tightened with emotion. I meant it. I've meant it since you looked at me like I was dangerous after I beat you at chess and made you see me as an equal instead of an employee. He kissed her, gentle this time, mindful of their injuries. Not the desperate collision of fear and desire, but something slower, deliberate. A promise instead of a plea, a future instead of just survival. When they pulled apart, Delilah rested her forehead against his. What happens now? Now you finish your nursing degree. We've already enrolled you for the spring semester. Full scholarship courtesy of the Castellano Foundation. And before you argue about charity, it's payment for services rendered. You've saved my mother twice, stopped 3 assassination attempts, and helped take down a 15-year revenge plot. That qualifies. Delilah pulled back, searching his face. I don't want to be bought. You're not being bought. You're being valued. There's a difference. 3 months later, Isabella walked into a secured hospital room where Silas Graves lay handcuffed to the bed, his legs still healing from the gunshot. Dante had tried to stop her. Delilah had insisted he let her go. Some debts could only be paid in person, some truths could only be spoken face to face. Isabella stood at the foot of the bed, looking at the man she'd wronged for 11 years. His face was gray with pain and exhaustion and the weight of knowing his entire crusade had been misdirected, but his eyes burned with recognition and rage. You. The word was venom and ash. Me. Isabella's voice didn't waver, though her hands trembled where she gripped her purse. Dominic didn't kill Elena. I did. Silas tried to sit up, the handcuffs rattling against the metal bed frame. What? I arranged the brake failure. I was jealous, angry, petty. I wanted to hurt my husband by hurting the girl he loved. I thought she'd be injured, shaken. I thought he'd end the affair to keep her safe. I didn't mean for her to die. Isabella's composure cracked. Tears ran down her face, tracking through her makeup, but she didn't look away from the man whose life she'd destroyed. But she did die. And instead of confessing, instead of facing what I'd done, I let Dominic protect me. Let him take the blame. Let him die 3 years later from a heart attack brought on by guilt that should have been mine alone to carry. Silas stared at her, his face cycling through rage, disbelief, and something that might have been grief, reopening like a wound that had never properly healed. You let me hunt the wrong man for 15 years. Yes. Why tell me now? Why not let me die thinking Dominic was the monster? Because I'm a coward, Silas, but I'm trying to be less of one. Because you deserve the truth, even if it comes too late to matter. And because I've been trying to buy forgiveness with good deeds when what I owe you is honesty. She pulled a folded document from her purse with shaking hands. This is a full confession. Signed. Witnessed by my attorney. You can give it to the prosecutors if you want. I won't fight the charges. I won't hide behind lawyers or money or my family's power. Silas looked at the paper like it was a snake, then at Isabella. The rage in his eyes dimmed to something colder, emptier, the look of a man who'd lost everything twice, once to death, once to the revelation that his vengeance had been aimed at shadows. Keep it. Prison won't bring Elena back, but you'll live the rest of your life knowing I know. Knowing that every good deed, every charitable act, every foster child you help is just you trying to buy your way out of hell. And that's worse than any cell. Isabella nodded slowly, set the confession on his bedside table anyway, placing it carefully like it was something precious instead of damning. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I know it's not enough. It will never be enough. But I need you to know that I see what I took from you. I see it every day. And I will carry that weight until the day I die. She turned and walked out her steps steady despite the tears, leaving Silas alone with the truth that had come 15 years too late to save anyone. 6 months after the night, everything changed. The Sapphire Room looked different under new management. The menu had expanded to include dishes accessible to people who couldn't afford $50 appetizers. The dress code had relaxed. Barrett Hughes was gone, fired, blacklisted, last seen working at a chain restaurant in Spokane where he couldn't abuse his staff without consequences. Delilah sat at table 9, not as a waitress, as a guest. As part owner, having invested some of Dante's money, her money now earned through blood and terror, and the simple act of choosing to help when everyone else chose to watch, into renovating the place into something that served the community instead of just the elite. She wore a simple white dress, elegant but understated. On her left hand, a diamond ring caught the light, not ostentatious but undeniably there. A promise, a future. Dante sat across from her, more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. The shadows were still there in his eyes, would probably always be there, but they didn't consume him anymore, didn't drive every decision. He'd learned that some things were worth more than power or control or revenge. Isabella sat beside him, quieter than she used to be. The events of the past 6 months had aged her in ways that had nothing to do with her body. She bounced a toddler on her knee, Mia, a foster child whose mother had died from the same kidney disease that had nearly killed Linda Kane. Isabella had personally funded the girl's placement with a loving family, had set up a trust for her education, had promised to be in her life as long as Mia wanted her there. It was one of 43 children Isabella had helped in the past 6 months. 43 lives saved or improved to balance the scales against one life taken. Delilah knew it would never be enough. Knew Isabella knew it too. But she also understood that guilt was a life sentence, and Isabella was serving it one act of penance at a time, trying to build enough good to outweigh the evil she'd done. The confession still sat in a locked drawer in Dante's office. Silas had refused to use it, had told the prosecutors he'd acted alone, had exonerated the Castellano family entirely before accepting a plea deal for 15 years. Some wounds, Delilah had learned, were too deep for justice to heal. Some debts could only be paid in decades of sleepless nights and the ghosts that came with them. Isabella caught Delilah's eye and offered a small, sad smile. No words were needed. They both understood the weight of the secret they carried, the complexity of loving someone who'd done something unforgivable, the reality that redemption was a journey without a clear destination. "The risotto is excellent." Delilah smiled at the nervous young waiter hovering nearby. "Thank you, Marcus." "Yes, Dr. Kane." He bowed slightly, still getting used to the fact that the restaurant's new part owner was the woman who'd performed CPR on this very floor 9 months ago. Dr. Kane. She'd finished her nursing degree in record time, compressing 2 years into 10 months through sheer determination and late nights fueled by coffee and purpose. The acceptance letter to medical school had arrived 2 weeks ago. University of Washington full scholarship starting in the fall. Dante reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Happy. My mother's healthy, living in a better apartment with round-the-clock care. My debts are paid. I'm going to be a doctor, and I'm engaged to a man who finally learned that losing isn't the end of the world. I let you win that chess game. Keep telling yourself that." Isabella laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in months. "Some things never change." Delilah looked out the window at the rain falling on Seattle's streets. She remembered the girl who'd stood here 9 months ago, cold, poor, invisible, desperate. She'd saved a life that night, expecting nothing in return, just doing what felt right when everyone else did nothing. Fate had given her everything, but it had also shown her the cost of everything, the complexity of justice, the impossibility of true redemption, the reality that good people could do terrible things and terrible people could have moments of grace. She squeezed Dante's hand, ready to go home. "Home is wherever you are." They stood. Dante helped his mother with her coat, the gesture automatic and tender. The bodyguards, fewer now, more discreet, moved into position at a respectful distance. The power couple of Seattle walked out into the rain, not running from the storm, walking through it together, accepting that the storm was part of life, that safety was an illusion, that all anyone could do was choose who to stand beside when the lightning struck. Delilah had learned her life did have a price. But it wasn't $127,000. It was something more valuable than money could measure: the courage to act when others freeze, the strength to see complexity instead of simple answers, the wisdom to understand that the most powerful piece on the board isn't the one that never falls, but the one that gets back up. And that knowledge was priceless.